as I promised you last week, we have the lovely Carol.
Hi.
She is with me on board Morning Star. And we are, of course, enjoying the British summer weather. In other words, it's cloudy, overcast and quite miserable. Anyway, not to worry. We've had a good week, haven't we, really?
Yeah, great. Lovely.
Been exciting, isn't it?
Exciting, very exciting.
Yeah. We'll find some more about that later on in the year. Now, way back in May time, I was given a book by a publisher to read, and I was asked if I would like to do a review on that book. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. Now, Ian being Ian, excuse the washing machine, Ian being Ian, decided that not only would I do the review on the book as asked for, but I wanted to talk to the author. Now, I am not being paid for anything to do with this book by the publishers, by the author, or anyone. It is totally off my own bat in my series Ian Meets. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to replay a live stream that I did with the author, Andy Griffee, and to whom I indebted to for permission to use images and, of course, his recording. So, without further ado, and it's very interesting, so don't run away, and I'll catch up with you at the end. It's all right. Right. Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for sparing this time with me.
Okay.
And I have viewers all around the world.
Okay.
And I'd very much like to put this out as one of my vlogs, so that they can sort of also get to know and meet you. Now, this association started when your publisher sent me Canal Pushers.
That's right, yeah.
Now, that book I absolutely loved. And I think I said in the review that it was one of those books you pick up and you don't want to put down. Now, I've recommended that book to several other people, including my father. Now, my father is an avid book reader because due to mobility issues, he can't do much else. And he's read your other two, which was River Rats and Oxford Blues.
Yeah, which was only out a couple of weeks ago. Yeah.
Right. Well, you write in the most fantastic way. There's no preamble, it's just straight in, but everything you need to know, you bring out. So is that down to your journalistic training?
I think it probably is a little bit, yeah. I mean, journalists tend to write short, sharp sentences. Every story has to cover the bases of who, what, where, when, how, why. As a journalist, you tend not to waste any words. In fiction, you can obviously expand a little bit, and there's more description, there's more character, there's more setting. But ultimately, I suppose if I have a style, as it were, it's probably emerged out of my journalism more than anything else. And the thing about journalism is you've got to grab the attention right at the start. You know, I went to journalism school way back when I was 20, and we used to spend a lot of time on the very, very first sentence of a story, the intro, and that has to really grab the reader. And when every story is competing for the reader's attention in a busy newspaper, you know, writing a good intro is a bit of an art. And I suppose the prologue now for my books, that very first chapter, is the equivalent of the intro. It's trying to grab the reader and say, wow, there's something happening here, you know, and you're going to want to turn the page to find out how it all ends up.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's exactly what I felt when I was reading that book. And by the way, I've downloaded the other two and I will be reading those.
Your father sounds very much like mine. Mine is also in Dorset. He's 82. He's confined to a wheelchair. but he spends all of his time reading crime novels.
Right.
So he's just about to read Oxford Blues, the latest, for the second time. I let him read them in manuscript form just to get an early opinion, and then they usually change a bit. So then he reads them when they come out as a book. So yeah, our fathers sound very, very similar.
Yeah, it sounds very, very similar as well. Yeah. Now, one question. I started reading Canal Pushers, and you brought in the fisherman.
Yes.
Now, without giving too much away, where did he come from?
Where does he come from?
Yeah, where did he come from? In the sense of, I know where he comes into your storyline.
Yeah.
But you actually start off with just like a description of this guy, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, he's a sociopath. So he's how he is because of the way in which he's been brought up, and he's a loner, and he's put upon by his workmates and his mother, and clearly that's kind of sent him a bit doolally. But where does he come from? It's quite interesting. You see, I chose to set my books on canals and waterways for a few reasons, and one of the reasons is that well, I mean, everybody kind of imagines canals as being sunny and, you know, covered in tree tunnels and green and bucolic and beautiful, and they can be. And when you're moored up at the bottom of a pub with a pint, you know, there's nowhere better to be in the world. But equally, I started narrowboating when I was 11, and there have been times where I've thought actually canals can be quite sinister and quite threatening and quite dangerous places as well. And sometimes, you know, you're going along and it's a grey sky, and suddenly you get a breeze on the back of your neck, and the hair, you know, the hairs, or what I've got left, you know, the kind of bristles go up. And I find canals can be, you know, two-sided really. And the other thing about canals is, you know, everybody, like the Canal and Rivers Trust, would have you believe that and Ho Season's adverts, you know, they would have you believe that everybody on the canal gets on really well with everybody else, and it's all sweetness and light. And you and I know that there's real tension on the canal. There's tension between narrowboat owners and hire boat people. There's tension between narrowboat owners and anglers. There's tension between anglers and cyclists. There's tension between cyclists and dog walkers. You know, actually, there's quite a lot of tension and aggro on the canals. And so I kind of play a bit on that as well. So it seemed to me quite natural for the first book that there was an angler who was the baddie, or one of the baddies.
One of the baddies.
And in my second book, which is also inspired by a true crime story, there's that was inspired by another true story about real tension between a community of liveaboards on the River Avon at Bath and the residents nearby. And the council decided that it was going to have a bit of a free-fall on moorings there. And in theory, people were only allowed to stay for 2 weeks, but in practice, they rocked up and stayed for more than a year. And it became a real battle between the residents and the narrowboat owners. And that got into the papers. And so that tension between boat owners and residents became one of the ideas behind River Rats, my second book, which is also based on the River Avon at Bath, although not exactly in that spot. So I chose the angler for those reasons, but I choose canals for much bigger reasons, because I think there isn't a lot of crime set on canals, and yet I think they're a kind of perfect backdrop setting. And the other beauty of it is, like, I can put my hero on a narrowboat, which means he can go off all around the country. So I can set my first book in the Midlands, and then I've got a reason to set the second book in Bath, because Jack Johnson gets on his boat and goes off to the Kennet and Avon. And then my third book is set on the Isis, which is what the Thames is called when it goes through Oxford, because Jack has moved off to Oxford in pursuit of the lovely Nina Wilde, his on-off love of his life. So so there are lots of reasons for me setting the books on canals, and I think it's a whole new genre in crime fiction called canal noir. That's what I call it.
Wow, whatever it is, it's absolutely fantastic. Is there going to be another in the sequence?
Yeah, I've already. So I'm trying for the last 3 years. I've brought out a book each year, which I can just about do when you take into account, or just thinking of the plot and doing all the research and then going to the place where you want to set it, because I try to get that as accurate as possible. So although Oxford Blues, which that's the latest one that came out a couple of weeks ago, I've actually finished the first draft of book 4 in the series, and although I don't know how the UK narrowboat community will react to this, because I've actually set the next one on the canals of Amsterdam. Jack and Nina go on holiday there after all the trauma in Oxford, and of course, because it's them, they get caught up in a whole series of murders which feature a very, very rare tulip that hasn't been seen for 400 years. So I'm really pleased with it. It feels more international and a bit more of a thriller than a whodunit. But my father, as we talked about, my father's read the first manuscript, and he says it's the best of the 4. So I trust his judgment.
Oh, that's really exciting. I know my father will be pleased to know that. I got to say one thing. When he read your Oxford Blues, he said that was the best ending in any of the books that he's read in a long time. The way that it was all came together. So he wanted me to mention that to you.
Oh, that's really kind of him. A few people have said that they could imagine the books as TV programs or films. And I don't do that deliberately, but I suppose because I worked in the BBC for 25 years and I worked in television news rather than drama, I suppose I have quite a visual imagination. So when I'm writing, I can visualize what's happening. And there's quite a big climax or drama at the end of all of the books. And I suppose Oxford Blues is probably the most dramatic yet. And I can imagine that on ITV on a Sunday evening, maybe. One day.
Well, I shall be tuning in definitely to that one. So you mentioned you do a lot of research. Is that based on your own experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I don't own a narrowboat. My wife won't let me. But I've hired, I've hired narrowboats all of my life. So I'm pretty competent and comfortable with being on a narrowboat. And so for example, the second book, which was set in Bath, I hired a boat in Bath and took my family up to Bradford-on-Avon and back for a long weekend, just so that I could really get a sense of the setting from a boat. And I've tried to do that with all of the books. But I wouldn't pretend to be a complete expert on narrowboating. So I have a trio of really experienced boaters who I found on World Canal Boat Forum, and they get an early draft and they then have a look at it and they tell me if I've got any of the words wrong or if I'm taking the boat uphill when I should be going downhill and that kind of thing. So they're my 3 men in a boat, and they check it all for me, which is very helpful.
Well, that's obviously really good from your perspective that you actually have got used to being on a narrowboat, because your descriptions of when you're in a pub and you're describing other narrowboaters, and also the tentative steps you take when you first own a narrowboat and take it out, they are just so real. It's very much to the point.
That's very good of you. I should also say I also rely heavily on the Pearson and Son Canal Companion books.
Right.
I've always kind of admired them, and they're usually very up to date and well illustrated. So when I started, I did the journey in Canal Pushers, up the Stratford Canal and down the Worcester and Birmingham, and I used Pearson and Son Canal Companions. And I wrote to Michael Pearson and said, I found his book so helpful, and he said, well, why don't I do a map for your book? And he actually did a bespoke map for the book. And I do try to make the stories as accurate as possible, so that people with boats or people who just want to walk along the towpath, they can see the bridge that I refer to, or the pub that I refer to, or the lock that I refer to, and it's all exactly as it is. So I try very hard. I have changed a couple of things but only for legal reasons. And I make that clear, in my author notes. So, for example, in Oxford Blues, there's a floating brothel in Oxford Blues, and I really had to invent a whole bridge and a little inlet where this brothel was, so that none of the existing boat owners on that stretch of river were accused of running such a naughty establishment.
Oh, I can't wait. If
There's a sign on one of the bedrooms on the boat which says, "If the boat is rocking, don't come knock. If the boat is rocking, don't come knocking." So, yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. I don't want to give it away, but in your Canal Pushers, the actual basic, I'm going to call him the squire of the farm, and his description of him and his wife had me in hysterics. That was took about a bit of light relief. It was brilliant.
Well, that's good, because I don't want them to be. Although actually on the face of it, Canal Pushers is about drug dealers and a sociopath serial killer. And actually a national press hunt for Nina. I don't want the books to be too kind of grim and too serious, so I try to kind of put a bit of humor in all of them, really. So yes, the major and his wife are designed to do that, and Jack's friend Will, who's an actor, he brings quite a lot of comedy into certainly the second book and the third book as well. And indeed, in the third book, naturism plays a part as well.
Oh, really?
Without giving it away.
Well, in that case, I must recommend it to a couple of our other vloggers on the network. You've probably you've heard of Sean and Colin, the Foxes, Foxes Afloat, and I believe that Colin is very much into that, so he would obviously enjoy that book.
Okay, well, yeah, he would. I think he definitely would.
Yeah. So you heard it here first, folks. So, how about you've had quite? You started off life, I believe, in the army.
Well, my father was in the army for 21 years. So that basically meant, I was born in Gibraltar in a Navy hospital. And grew up in all of those garrison towns, lived in Germany, Hong Kong, Aldershot, Colchester, Blandford, all of those kind of army bases. And then when I was 11, I got a bit fed up of changing schools every couple of years. So I applied to go to an army boarding school called the Duke of York's Royal Military School in Dover. And I managed to get in there. And so between 12 and 18, although my family were all around the world and moving all the time, I was in one place for my schooling and just going home for the holidays wherever the family happened to be. So yeah, a lot of my friends who went to army boarding school went into the army, but it was a close shave for me, and I managed to escape into journalism instead. And
you also, was it 25 years you've been in journalism?
Well, slightly longer than that. I went straight into newspapers from school. So I did my apprenticeship on local newspapers, and did all the things that a local newspaper journalist does, like magistrates' court and coroner's court and weddings and funerals and that kind of thing. And I did that for a couple of years, and then I decided to go to university after completing my apprenticeship, because I always loved literature and I used to read a lot. And I suppose that ultimately that's why all this time later I'm trying to have a go at writing myself. So I went to university in Manchester and I studied English literature and American literature, and I loved that. But when I finished, I went back into journalism, and I went back into the Bath Chronicle, actually, which is why I know Bath so well. Spent 2 years there on the paper, met my wife, who was a reporter on the paper. We're still married 30 odd years later. And then she became a sub-editor, which meant that she could go through all of my copy and hack it to pieces, which I didn't think much of. And then, so I became a news editor, which meant I could tell her what to do, and she didn't think much of that either. So the future of our relationship depended on one of us getting out, really. So I then applied to join the BBC in Bristol for the regional news programme Points West, and loved it. And I ended up staying in the BBC for 25 years, and I kind of moved around quite a bit. I moved from Bristol to Southampton to Birmingham to London, and went into senior management and did, at one stage I was responsible for all of the local radio stations in England and all of the regional TV operations. And then my final job was in charge of a huge project to expand Broadcasting House in London and move lots more people in it from national BBC News. So I loved working for the BBC. And then when I finished, I did a couple of years consultancy as a media consultant, and that involved working with broadcasters in Malaysia and Dubai and various places. But I always really, really wanted to have a go at writing. So as the consultancy work started to end, I thought, well, why not have a go? And that's how Canal Pushers came about. But Canal Pushers was interesting because although I had the germ of an idea and the germ of a story based on these reports of a serial killer in Manchester, on the towpath in Manchester, I kind of made the story up as I went along, which is really tough to do, actually. It's a good thing to do because you're surprising yourself all the time. So if you're surprising yourself, hopefully you're surprising the reader. But I threw all these plot lines up in the air and got about halfway through, and I thought, how the heck am I now going to bring them all back together again and finish them? So it took me best part of 2.5 years to write the first one. And then I took it to a publisher and they said, yeah, we really, really like this, but it's a crime novel and we don't do one-off crime novels. We're interested in a series involving the same heroes and characters. So you have to prove to us that you can write a second book before we'll give you a contract for the first book. So I thought, I've just spent 2.5 years writing the first book. So they said, you'd have to write it, but you have to prove that you've got that second book in you. So for that one, I wrote 40 chapters, outlines down, and I worked out the plot all in advance without writing the novel.
Right.
I wrote an outline of chapter by chapter. So, and I gave that to them, and they said, "Yep, okay, you can have a 2-book contract because you've kind of convinced us that you can do a second book." But that meant that when I came to write River Rats, which is the second book, this one's set in Bath, it was so much easier. I wrote it in about 4 months because I'd had it all planned out in advance. And yet, when I got to the end, I thought, "Oh, something's it's just a bit too neat and tidy. It's a bit too all wrapped up." So I went back and I invented a whole new plot line about a Hell's Angels gang and wove it through the book. And the book felt a lot better. So I've now been told that the first book I wrote as a pantster because I was writing it by the seat of my pants. And the second book I wrote as a plotter because I plotted it all out. And actually in the process, I've now discovered that my best thing to do is a combination of the two, to plot it out in advance, but leave a lot of room for my imagination to kind of, go where it wants during the course of the writing process. So I'm a bit of both now, pantster and a plotter.
Well, it's great because there's always a multi-thread running through your books, isn't there? You've got lots of things going on, but they're all easily understandable and followable. You don't get confused about them, but there's a lot going on always. You sort of go off in different directions, or you take a little slightly different twist with the story, but it all comes back together and concludes in a fantastic way. And it's a very, very fresh in my mind, and certainly in those that have read the Canal Pushers, they've all said the same thing. What a very fresh approach to writing a book it is. So I've got to pass that compliment back on to you because everybody that's read it has been absolutely really taken by it. So that's great. Now,
thank you, Ian. That means a lot to me. That because I'm still finding my way with it all. But it's lovely when you get direct feedback from people, and with Twitter and all social media, you do get almost instant feedback these days. And so it's lovely when you've spent a whole year on something to know that people are enjoying it. And if people say it's a page turner, that nothing pleases me more than that, really, because the writers that I really admire are the people like John Buchan, who wrote 39 Steps, and they're just great storytellers, and they write stories that make you want to keep turning the page, and that's all I'm aiming to do, really. I'm not aiming to win the Booker Prize. I just want to write books that people enjoy.
Well, you certainly do that. And I would like to add that the review that I did for you got published, and I have a couple of copies of that in that publication. If I send it to, is it Hannah at the publishing company,
Yeah.
will you be able to get it okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for doing that. Yeah,
That's all right. That's a great pleasure. I think, it's been really terrific to be able to talk to you today, and I hope you appreciate the fact that I'm going to put this out in the next couple of weeks. I'll let you know when it's going out.
Brilliant.
Basically, there'll be an intro and an outro, and it will be just what we've done now, and it's going to be amazing, and there'll be a lot of interest, I trust, and I'll give you lots of links for anyone who's interested to get hold of your books. So can I thank you, Andy, so very, very much for your time, and absolutely love chatting with you. And I really look forward to reading the next 2 books, but the 4th one when it comes out.
Thank you very much, Ian. I hope you enjoy them. And I really enjoyed our chat. Happy boating.
And to you. And have a great summer. Thank you now.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. There we go then. That was different, wasn't it? Now, you weren't expecting that from me this week, were you? But what a lovely guy he is. And I've actually put in the description below the actual review.
Why did you leave it in?
Courtesy of the washing machine. So there we go then. Wasn't that a great interview? Andy was a really, really nice guy, very, very easy to talk to, and I'm really excited about his upcoming 4th novel. The links to all of his books you will find in the description of this video, along with the actual review that I initially wrote and has since been published. But it was great fun to do, wasn't it, girl?
Yes, I was there.
You were there. She was there, along with Simon and Tracy. Hey! So we had a great time in doing that one. I just want to thank everyone for all your kind comments. Thank you so much for the support that you give me through messages and likes and lovely comments on my videos. And for those of you that follow me on my Facebook family, thank you very, very much for the support you've given me over the past 7 to 10 days. It's been lovely to hear from you, despite the difficulties that we've had to experience, but hopefully they're well on their way now to being put back to bed and we can get back on with our summer cruising. Thanks again to all of you who subscribe to me on YouTube, and if you've not already subscribed to me, please do hit the subscribe button. I'm just shy of 3,000 subscribers, and it would be lovely to hit that figure. Thanks to everyone, and I just want to wish you all the most pleasant of weeks. May your health be good, may the sun shine on you, and until we meet again with you next Sunday, this is Ian and
Carol.
Aboard Morning Star saying, ta-da.
Bye-bye.